This is the second of our films on cargo ships and tankers of the golden era, and we think that was between the 30s and the 70s, after which time container ships and supertankers ruled the waves. The film varies in quality depending on when it was taken and the proficiency of the photographer. Most is converted cine, some in black and white and some in colour. We found it difficult to identify a lot of the ships, but it was worth including them, as you may know some of them, and might even have sailed in them. They were the days. You seafarers will remember Board of Trade Sports. So, let's start. The Millskirk. Built for the British government in 1920, this ship was managed by the Glen Line until 1921, when she was sold to the Dutch VNS. She's 6,038 gross tons. Shaw Savills Waiwera of 12,000 gross tons. These pictures were taken in Barcelona. The Manchester Ship Canal before the war. This ship is the York Wood, built in 1936, of 5,400 gross tons. She was owned by the Constantine Shipping Company and was sunk by U-507 whilst en route from Durban to the United Kingdom. The 1930 Sultan Star of 7,700 gross registered tons. These ships are seen in the Liverpool docks. There's a Clan Line cargo ship there. Built in 1927 by Denny and Brothers, Dumbarton. This is the Beaverburn of 9,874 gross tonnage. She was sunk in February 1940 in the North Atlantic. She's seen here in the Thames in happier times. The Union Castle, Sandown Castle, built in 1921 by Short Brothers. She's seen here loading a car. The British India Marlborough, built in 1922, she was 9,100 gross tons. The New York waterfront with the Empire State Building, at that time the tallest building in the world. Here we have a Holland America Line passenger ship. We couldn't identify this one. What a wonderful tug. And here's a little coaster coming into Malta. And now a series of scenes, ships docked around the world. Here we're in Southampton, an Alexander tug. The little blobs in the water are mothballed minesweepers. Originally called the Wassengenwald and built in 1923 for Hamburg American Line, this ship was seized in 1940 by Holland and renamed Sembillingen. She's seen here with a smaller ship tied up alongside. (1,500-ton) NYK liner Shuto Maru was built in 1909. We're now going to see some Blue Star ships. A 1947 Blue Star liner of 10,700 gross tons. We next have the Empire Star of 11,861 gross tons, built in 1946. The 6,291-ton Canadian Star, built in 1957. And here we see the Brazil Star, built in 1947, and she was 10,716 gross tons. We see her again in her black and white guise in the London docks. Again in London we find the Scottish Star, built in 1950, and she was 9,996 gross tons. The Melbourne Star, built in 1947, 13,179 gross tons. And we get another look at her now from a different angle. The Tacoma Star, 7,197 gross tons, built in 1949 and scrapped in 1961. The 8,400-ton Hobart Star, seen here in dry dock. She was built in 1956 and scrapped in 1978. Some lovely pictures taken in Curacao of the Tasmania Star, built in 1950 and scrapped in 1975. She was 11,950 gross tons. And that concludes our pictures of Blue Star cargo ships, and we now switch to the Australian coast. And so here we are on the Australian coast, and our first ship is the Mount Kembla, a bulk ore carrier built in 1960 by Broken Hill Proprietary Company, Whyalla, for the Australian Coastal Shipping Commission. And she was managed by the Australian National Line. She's 10,112 gross registered tons. The Lake Illawarra was built in 1958 by Broken Hill Proprietary Limited, again managed by the Australian National Line. She was 7,274 gross registered tons. The 1959 South Esk, and then the 1953 Windara. The Dalby was built in 1947 for the Australian government, but in 1957 she transferred to the Australian Coastal Shipping Commission. She was 2,350 gross tons. The Daylesford, built in 1946, was another managed by the Australian National Line. She was 2,351 gross tons. We're moving to pictures taken from the Isle of Wight. This collier of the Central Electricity Generating Board was one of 6 sister ships. This is a Swiss cargo ship of the Swiss Atlantique Society d'Armament, built in the 1950s. I regret that the pictures are somewhat cloudy, but look at this lovely little coaster. You will see plenty of ships today off the Isle of Wight, but they're mostly container ships and lack the grace and beauty of those lovely little cargo ships. Here we see the Arkansas, built in 1947, of 3,600 gross tons. She was Danish. Next is a 1947 Maronda. Then we have an Anfaltings AS Turfing cargo ship of the 1950s. Another ship of the same line. The 1950 Japan of the Swedish East Asiatic Company. She's 7,600 gross tons. This picture was taken from the deck of Oronsay in Malta. Another small cargo ship going about its business in the Mediterranean. Now there's some heavy lifting equipment. And this small ship is well equipped with its own lifting gear. We get a very good view of this bulk carrier, but unfortunately I cannot identify her. A small coaster docked in Madeira. One of the Ellerman and Papayani line service. Two more ships here with heavy lifting gear. Shaw Savills 1976 Majestic 12,000 gross tons. This is an early container ship, the Tokyo Bay of 56,822 gross tonnage. A Ro-Ro freight ferry, the Doric ferry. The Glen Line, Glen Erne, built in 1938 of 9,784 gross tons, scrapped in 1970. The Hulda Maersk, built in 1950 for A.P. Muller, 5,720 gross tons. These ships are gathered in Suez Bay prior to going through the Suez Canal. Shaw Savills Bardic, built in 1944 as the USS Willapa. She was chartered in 1954 to Shaw Savill Line. She's 8,014 gross tons. Built in 1964, the 485-ton Lurana went through several name changes, and here we see her as the Isola di Ustica. And now we're going to see a series of tankers. We believe this to be the Soviet tanker Trud, built in 1960 of 17,600 gross tons. The 1957 Balmaceda of 12,835 gross tons. Pictures taken from Orion, a 12,000-ton shell tanker of the 1950s. This picture was taken in Curacao. This little tanker is having a rather bumpy ride. Here we're in the Straits of Gibraltar. A Greek-operated tanker of the 1960s. Then we see a small shell tanker passing close to the Bardic. We will shortly see the Esso Anglia of 97,000 gross tons, built in 1969. We now switch back to cargo ships, and we'll start with the Ben Line. Here we see the Ben Hope, built in 1945. She was 9,952 gross tons. She's seen here in the Panama Canal. The Port Napier of 11,900 tons, built in 1947. The Port Fairy was built in 1928 and was 8,000 tons. She was scrapped in 1965. The Port Launceston, built in 1957 by Holland and Wolff, was 10,220 gross registered tons. The Port Lyttelton in dry dock. This is the Port Fremantle, built in 1927. The bow of the Port Nicholson, with the City of Philadelphia, an Element cargo ship, behind her. Once again, these pictures have been taken having come out of air conditioning into a hot climate. But this is the Port Pirie, and she was built in 1947, scrapped in 1972. She was 10,561 tons. We end this section on Port Line with a rather rusty Port Melbourne, built in 1955, of 10,470 tons and sold to the Greeks in 1973. And so now we leave the Port Line and concentrate on some other cargo ships of various shapes and sizes. I have to say I was rather disappointed that my friend and colleague Richard Clack, who has identified so many of these ships, failed on this occasion. But what a wonderful little rusty bucket. Coming up to the Dardanelles, two more coasters, this cargo ship has a sick seaman being taken off to a larger ship with a doctor. These ships are standing off Istanbul. So some more shots taken in the Panama Canal. Always a very good place for taking pictures of ships going one way and the other. We see here the bulk trader built in 1959 for Versek for Skibbs, Cecil Oslo. She's 10,500 gross tons. Another bulk carrier, the Jofengel, also built in 1959, and this time for Olsen Ugelstad of Norway. She's 12,000 gross tons and was eventually scrapped in 1978. This is the Emma Oldendorf, a bulk carrier built in 1969. She's 37,614 gross tons. The 8,900 ton Star Altair built in 1959. We will soon see the Tahitian built in 1953, 12,614 gross tons. The Trickler built in 1960 of 10,000 tons. Through the bridge door we see the Clan Menzies built in 1958. She was 7,685 gross tons. The S.A. Weltewerden, built in 1966 of 9,500. A Yugoslavian cargo ship. And this is the City of Tunis of 1930, 5,400 tons. Cita di Tunisi. The Sir John Franklin, 6,700 gross tons. And now we're going to have a look at some blue funnel ships. We start with the Patroclus. It was built in 1923 and was 11,314 gross tons. She was sunk in 1940 whilst going to pick up survivors from the Laurentic. Built in 1925 and seen here in Colombo Harbour, the Themis was 6,639 gross tons. She was scrapped in 1957. A grainy colour picture which is difficult to identify, but it could be the Telemachus. Another one seen from the bow of Oriana, but too difficult to identify. And here we see the 1950 built Tercia of 8,900 gross tons. In Colombo, the 10,125 gross ton Helenus. The 1933 Gorgon, she's 3,500 gross tons. A lovely picture of the Priam, she's 9,975 gross tons. And this blue funnel steamer is too far off to be identified. And here we see the Pyrrhus. Here in Suva we just get a glimpse of the bow and funnel of another blue funnel steamer. And two more at a distance to end with. We'll have a look at some tankers now as they pass us by. The Texaco Scandinavia, built in 1962, of 13,222 gross tons. The Hogue Ranger, built in 1952, 10,100 gross tons. She's followed by SO Cambridge, built in 1954, of 17,500 gross registered tons. And then the SO Warwickshire, built in 1962, achieves 48,815 gross tons. A Shell tanker, British Virtue was built in 1945 by Swan Hunter. She was 8,553 gross tons. Of a similar sign, the British Caution, built in 1946 by Swan Hunter. This ship, with an unpronounceable name, we'll see later on in the film. The crude oil tanker Athol Chief, of 12,041 gross tons. She was built in 1958. Built in 1954, the Oakwood. She's 11,360 gross tons. We see some more general cargo ships. A Victory ship, still in its wartime paint. And then several more tankers, most of which are in Suez Bay. And we go back to cargo ships. A Levant Line Victory ship. Behind her is a Hellenic Line's Belgian, originally the Lestris. Astern of the Oriana we see a Polish Ocean Lines cargo ship. We now move to Hong Kong Harbour. The Polish Ocean Line's Andrzej Strug. The Coho Maru, built in 1957, of 9,200 tons. The Sandanger, built in 1951 for Westphal Larsen and Company. She's 5,600 tons. A roll-on, roll-off ferry, one of the earlier ones. This is a Hamburg America Line cargo ship, a Jamaica banana producer SS Company refrigerated cargo ship. Massey-Ra, built in 1957, of 8,733 tons, for Brocklebank Limited. This is the 5,352 Langfon, built in 1949. The ship in dry dock is the Middlesex, built in 1953 for the Federal Steam Navigation Company. Then we see the Canopic, built in 1954 for Shaw Savill, of 11,200 gross tons. Canadian Pacific's Beaver Fur, of 2,900 gross tons. The 1950 Cardiganshire, a Sudan Shipping Line cargo ship. Royal Mail Lines Ebro, and the Port Nicholson. Here we see Cunard's Alonia, built in 1960. She's 7,000 gross tons, and she was scrapped in 1993. St. Line St. John, of 6,900 tons, built in 1954. Next is Shaw Savill's 10,700 gross ton Delphic, built in 1949. There's an Ellerman Lines ship here. Bullard King and Company Limited's ship Jenny was built by Swan Hunter and Wakeham Richardson in 1938. She was 8,180 gross tons. And here we have the banked line Isipingo, 7,069 gross tons. And now we see the P&O 7,600 ton Khyber in Colombo. Whilst back in London, a Port of London Authority launch passes us. The 2,800 ton coastwise collier Cormain. Canadian Pacific's Beaver Cove of 1947, 9,800 gross tons. Built in 1949, the Cananore of P&O, 7,000 gross tons. Built initially for the UK-India route and scrapped in 1972. The Victory ship Indian Navigator was 7,600 gross tonnes. Yamaguchi Maru was 10,000 tonnes and operated by the NYK line. And now we get a lovely shot of a cargo ship coming through the Corinth Canal. The Madorentz, 1962, of 1,300 gross tonnes. A Delmas bulk carrier. The 8,100 ton Clan Shaw. Then we have the icebreaker D'Urberville. The Tinjigara of 1951, 9,067 gross tons. She was built for Royal Inter-Ocean Lines. This ship was originally named Jupiter under the German flag. Then she was Jupiter II under the Panamanian flag before becoming Caps Union and once more back under the German flag. $15,000 gross ton Soviet tanker, built in 1965. A DFDS ship in the Nordana line service. These were built in 1969. We're now in the Grand Canal in Venice. We're now going to have a look at some of the ships of the British India Company. And we start with the Chhindwara, built in 1950, 7,500 gross tons and scrapped in 1972. Our next ship is the Pioneer, and this was the second company ship of that name. She was built in 1947 and scrapped in 1971. She was 5,340 gross tons. This is the Chilka. She was built in 1950 and she was 7,132 gross tons and scrapped in 1972. The N-Class New Deer of 1954, 8,500 gross tons. We see her again here. And this is the Etola of 6,793 tons, built in 1940. And now let's join the Aloran Palm. The Aloran Palm was built in 1960. She was 5,658 gross tons. She was sold in 1979 to Liberian interests. We join her here on a voyage to Lagos. Down in the bowels of the engine room, they're told to stand by for arrival at 0700. I apologise for the marks down the right-hand side. The film was scratched but too good to miss. See here the Lauren Palm's sister, Alicia Palm, built in 1961 and scrapped in 1979. She was 5,682 tons. This is the engine room repeater telegraph. Now we see the Lauren Palm again. Back in Tilbury we see the Elmina Palm, built in 1957 of 5,356 tons. Also in Tilbury the Akasa Palm, built in 1958 of 5,802 tons. She was sold to Panamanian interests. We see here the Roallan Castle, 7,950 tons. She was built in 1943 and scrapped in 1971. Here she's in dry dock. The Good Hope Castle, built in 1965, she's 13,152 gross tons. Here we see the 1935 Roslin Castle in heavy seas. She was 8,500 tons. This is the Wacosta, built in 1944. She's 6,065 gross tons. The year is 1994, the 50th anniversary of the D-Day landings, and the restored Jeremiah O'Brien was there to mark the occasion. This Liberty ship was built in 1943 at the New England Shipping Company, Maine. She's now a living Liberty Ship Museum based in Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. She was 12,900 tons. It was a remarkable occasion with many of the big liners on show, including the QE2 and the Canberra, and what was then the Vistafjord, later the Coronia, and then the much-loved Saga Ruby. Jeremiah O'Brien saw 16 months' service during the war, both in the Mediterranean and in the Pacific. At the end of the war, most of these Liberty ships were removed from service in 1946 and subsequently sold on to domestic and overseas buyers. Some were retained by the US Maritime Commission for potential reactivation in the event of any future wars. This ship was one of those mothballed. In fact, she was mothballed for 33 years. In 1979, the ship was acquired for restoration. She had the distinction of being the only ship to leave the reserve fleet under her own steam. But it was to take many years and a lot of heartache to get her up to the condition that she was in by 1994. Oh, how I wish so many of those lovely liners could have been restored in the same fashion. But that, of course, would have been far too expensive and was not to be. At least we can be thankful that so much was kept on cinefilm, and we now have it to show and to remember those ships by. I am indeed grateful to the gentleman who took these films of this event. I met him on Shieldall when my own camera packed up and I was filming Canberra coming in for the last time. And I asked him if I could have a copy of his film. Not only did he provide me a copy of the events of that day, but also of this momentous occasion. And I'm very pleased to be able to share it with you. And now we leave the Jeremiah O'Brien as she sails away back to San Francisco. An HSD cargo passenger ferry. The Monte Anaga, built in 1959, she was 6,813 gross tons. We're going to go on a voyage on her from London to Tenerife. It was built for the ANZA line, and they were allocated a large share of the Canary Island fruit and vegetable market. They sailed from London and from Liverpool. Rough sea or calm, the crew still have work to do. Tied up at last. We're back in Hong Kong Harbour. In the 50s and 60s I went there a lot, and it was indeed a beautiful harbour with lots of ships. More recently I did a trip from Hong Kong to Zhaoqing up the Pearl River, and it was fog and smoke all the way. Such is progress. And now Vancouver, where the logs are floated down the river to the ships, and men jump precariously from one log to the other as the ships are loaded. They would call this a puffer in Scotland. It's certainly puffing away. The Clan Malcolm, built in 1957 and sold to Panamanian Interest in 1979, she was 7,686 gross tons. Another Clan ship shrouded in mist. The Bristol City of 5,887 gross tons. The Irish dry cargo coaster, Reginald Kieron, built in 1957 of 464 gross tons. She too was sold to Panamanian Interests in 1974. After several changes of name, she was eventually wrecked in June of 1982. This is the Nosaga, built in 1944 as the Leaside Park. Here we see her as Nosaga when she was sold in 1949 to Cia Naviera Oceana. She's 7,160 gross tons. The 6,740 Nicoline Mask, built in 1951. The Sanuki Maru, built in 1955, 9,308 gross tons. The Nicoreo of 3,420 gross tons, built in 1957. Seen here in the Panama Canal. Here we're in Kobe, and you see a Japanese Victory type ship on the left. We see Ellerman's City of Karachi. She's 7,300 gross tons and was built in 1951. And the Ellerman cargo passenger liner City of Paris, built in 1922 of 10,900 gross tons. The 8,300 ton Port Allenby, built in 1965. We're going to end the second part of Cargo Ships and Tankers, the Golden Era, in Sydney Harbour, where better. And here we're in the Pyrmont area, where after the war all the big liners used to berth. We trust you have enjoyed this episode. A few moments of nostalgia and a chance to swing the lamp with a colleague.